Professor of Mathematics here at the University of Auckland. Also was a co-director with Vaughan of the NZIMA and the NZMRI. I'd like to welcome you all here today. A special welcome to people who are watching from overseas. Wendy and her family, other family members, colleagues and long-time friends who couldn't make it today. Just before I introduce the celebrant, Philippa Brothers, just a few housekeeping matters. One, you're all very welcome to stay afterwards for tea and coffee and a few nibbles in the foyer here. Some of you have been invited to lunch, and if you've got an invitation to that and you need to find out how to reach the venue, please see me afterwards. I have a pile of maps here that show how to get there. And finally, bathrooms are through this door and to the left and then to the right. It's not far away if you need those. Okay, thanks very much. Without further ado, let me welcome Philippa Brothers, who's going to be conducting this morning's proceedings. Thanks, Philippa.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome, welcome, welcome to all. We are here to remember and honour the life of Sir Vaughan Frederick Randall Jones, to acknowledge his distinguished career and to share memories and stories. Vaughan's wife Wendy and their children Bethany, Ian and Alice, possibly Mokapuna as well, are with us, watching from across the globe. Also present in that way is his niece Fern in Australia and many others who cannot be here in person. Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Philippa Brothers. I am a celebrant and a family friend. It is my privilege to be part of this memorial for Vaughan. We will be hearing from family, colleagues and friends. There are musical interludes and photographs to view. We'll be together here for about an hour. As Marston said, there will be an opportunity for us all to talk together more afterwards, and you're warmly invited to stay for refreshments in the foyer. Vaughan Jones did not like to stand on ceremony. Before the opening of the Vaughan Jones Room at Auckland Grammar in February 2000, Vaughan wrote in an email to the organisers, "I dislike being in the spotlight and don't want any formal ceremony." Nonetheless, Vaughan is firmly in the spotlight today. His sister Tessa will be talking to us later on, bringing stories from Vaughan's early days and family life. Educated at St Peter's College before excelling at Auckland Grammar, Vaughan completed his MSc with first-class honours at Auckland University. A fortuitous Swiss government scholarship took him to Geneva for his graduate studies, which saw him choose mathematics over physics, and his career blossomed from there. It was in Geneva that Vaughan met Wendy, an American Fulbright scholar, at a ski camp for foreign students. They married in 1979, and their long and happy union was blessed with 3 children, Bethany, Ian, and Alice. Vaughan's curriculum vitae is extensive. After gaining his Docteur et Sciences in math in 1979, he taught first at UCLA before several years at the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. Back to the West Coast, from 1985, Vaughan was Professor of Mathematics at the University of California, Berkeley. Most latterly, Stevenson Chair and Distinguished Professor of Mathematics at Vanderbilt University, and also Professor Emeritus at Berkeley and Distinguished Alumni Professor here at the University of Auckland. In 1990, he was a recipient of the Fields Medal, the mathematics equivalent of a Nobel Prize. Shortly afterwards, he was awarded the inaugural Rutherford Medal of the Royal Society of New Zealand, of which society he was also made an honorary fellow. There is a long list of special awards and honours, many received by him, some inaugurated by or named for him, the scientific advisory boards he sat on, his services to the international and local mathematics community. All this information is available and plentiful online. I was especially taken with his appointment as Vice President of the International Guild of Knot Tiers, along with his certificate in barista skills at MIT, achieved in 2014. Vaughan never stopped learning, latte art. In my research for this day, I discovered a huge range of material from Vaughan's career. I heard interviews, sat in on a couple of recorded lectures, paddled in the rock pools of physics, and got up to my ankles in mathematics. Naturally, I was well out of my depth shortly after the introductions. But in all the recorded media, there was a common thread which I did understand. That was the ease and beauty of Vaughan's communication style. Was there ever a more relaxed lecturer? He roamed across the stage, he waved his hands, he made side jokes. His speech was peppered with Kiwi vernacular. Every so often he would cast a piercing glance at his audience to make sure they got a point. I didn't understand the material, but I recognized my friend. He was the same in ordinary conversation. I couldn't have been more entertained. Soon we will be hearing from David Gould and Gavin Martin, both supremely well qualified to tell us about the breadth and import of Vaughan's academic career and manifold contributions to his field. Vaughan was often part of our family holidays, and indeed had his very first taste of windsurfing at our family batch in Ipipiri, the Bay of Islands. My brother Pete might tell you that story, among other tales and legends, tall or true, from school days through to recent days. My enduring memory of Vaughan is there, at the batch. We would sit on the deck after dinner, drinking short whiskies, smoking cigars, and blowing pretty good smoke rings. Just shooting the breeze. With Vaughan, there was nothing easier. So in this, our memorial for Vaughan, we will now watch messages prepared for this event by Wendy and Bethany. Thank you, Master.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you on this sad day. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Wendy Jones, Vaughan's wife. I'm sorry I can't attend in person, but COVID makes that impossible. Vaughan and I were married for 41 years. I still can't process the idea that he and I won't be together ever again. He was the love of my life, my husband, the father of my children, my travel companion, my tennis and golf partner, my chamber music partner, my math tutor. It is handy to be married to a mathematician when one is a student in a PhD program in economics. And perhaps most of all, my best friend. We shared many interests and also had a very complementary, loving relationship. Vaughan introduced me to so many things, including his country, New Zealand. As you know, Vaughan traveled a lot worldwide, and I loved traveling with him. His highest priority was coming to New Zealand, and he came to New Zealand for a few months every year. At times, his travels were difficult for our family in California because he was gone so much, but I never minded because when he was in New Zealand, we all knew how much it meant to him to be there, to participate in the math community, and to visit family and friends. He had a very strong bond with his country and never forgot his roots. In fact, in the math world, he often used his influence and position to contribute as much as he could to math research and teaching in New Zealand. He wanted to give back as much as he could to the place and people he loved. Combining our two careers and family life was often a challenge. I remember in the early 1980s, I had just finished my master's degree at Princeton, and I had a job offer from the New York Federal Reserve Bank as an economist. The question was, should I take this job and work full-time, even though Vaughan was very busy with his career and we had a little girl to look after? At the time, my father made a comment that has stuck with me. He said that having my own career would be a good thing for me, because following Vaughan around, I would be like an Army wife without the support of the Army. At the time, I thought that his description of my situation, being an Army wife without the Army, was accurate. However, I have changed my mind completely on this, and that is due to the incredible welcome and support that my children and I have received from Vaughan's family, friends, and the math community all over the world, and in particular in New Zealand. I want to take the opportunity today to thank all of you here in New Zealand for your warmth and friendship. When our family visited New Zealand, we were always often staying with people in their homes, And I would like to especially mention Vaughan's sister Tessa and her children, Faye, Lindy, and Colin, the Duder family, Gavin and Diane, Jack and Helen, and Doug and Irene. These amazing people hosted our family year after year, and we always had a wonderful, magical time. Also included in our trips to New Zealand, as a family, were visits to St. Peter's, the boarding school Vaughan attended, and Auckland Grammar. I have always thought Vaughan was so lucky to get such a top-notch education. We met up with Vaughan's friends from Auckland Grammar frequently, not only in New Zealand, but all around the world. Vaughan felt totally at home with the boys. When they got together, they just picked up where they had left off and enjoyed a deep bond. Recent exploits included annual surf and turf, in other words, golf outings, and a project to travel the length of New Zealand on their own steam. I also enjoyed getting to know their wives and felt very welcome in this group. I hope I will be back in New Zealand someday soon, and I look forward to seeing you again. I also hope to see the New Zealand mathematics research community continue to flourish and grow. That is what Vaughan would have wanted. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Bethany Jones Gassemi, Vaughan Jones's eldest daughter. Although my heart is heavy, it is an honor to address my father's colleagues, friends, and family in New Zealand. My siblings and I have lost our beloved father, and New Zealand has lost a most devoted son. Although Dad's studies took him far away from his homeland, he was a Kiwi forever. Dad was a wonderfully engaging storyteller. He was great at making up stories, but just sharing a memory or two was enough to quiet all of three of us kids so that he might tell us some more. His stories of growing up in New Zealand were full of vivid memories of family, of early childhood with his dear sister Tessa, of romping around with cousins, climbing through the bush, falling off the rafters into an unhappy group of sheep, working on a farm for the summer, and the beach, always the beach. Then, of course, there were his stories of school. These tales involved less freedom, though they still held wonder. Only a few years ago, on a visit to St. Peter's with some friends, he exclaimed out loud his joy at seeing the desk where he first opened an algebra book, and the rest was history. But the story he repeated most about St. Peter's was the time when, as a prefect, he was instructed to make sure that the younger boys didn't crawl around under the beds after lights out. Being a prefect did not turn out to suit my dad, as he was quickly found crawling around, making the very ruckus he was supposed to contain. This produced a very hard smack on his backside that he never forgot. Mischief, leading to smacks on the backside, seemed to follow him into his years at Auckland Grammar, and I swear he remembered some of those episodes fondly as he told us how much he deserved what he got. Dad's stories of Auckland Grammar featured several teachers whom he admired greatly, but I always got the sense that one of the things he appreciated the most about Auckland Grammar was the community it fostered among its students. The star players in Dad's tales about high school were his friends. This talented, adventurous, and loyal group pushed each other to excel in their studies, in rugby, and, if one believes the stories, in drinking. He stayed close with these friends for the rest of his life. I wish I had more stories to tell of my father's studies in math and physics at Auckland Grammar and at Auckland University, and of his work years later with the math community in New Zealand. The truth is, Dad didn't really tell us those stories. To us kids, Dad wasn't a world-famous mathematician. He was just a great dad with a big heart and magical stories. But he didn't need to tell us how much he loved math or how much he loved New Zealand. He was absolutely dedicated to the math community, and to the math community in New Zealand especially. After leaving New Zealand for the great unknown at age 21, he was so happy to eventually come back, year after year, to co-found and organize conferences at the New Zealand Math Research Institute. My father loved to sing. I can still hear his beautiful baritone sing out his favorite hymn. I shall not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. I don't think my dad identified with the religious message of this hymn, or any hymn, but the poetry spoke to him, and the music spoke to him, and the memory of singing as a boy at St. Peter's. Looking back, I like to think that my dad's calling was to help build a Jerusalem of sorts, a metaphoric city of enlightenment and collaboration. Now that he's gone, I find comfort in knowing that the mathematicians of the world will continue to build that city, to drive each other to excel, and to enjoy uncovering the secrets of the universe. It was Dad's joy and his great pride to do that work in New Zealand, his cherished home country, his most green and pleasant land.
Thank you, Bethany, Wendy. Even though physically far away, you, Vaughan's dear family, are in our thoughts and in our hearts. We acknowledge you. If you were in this room, you would feel the aroha nui, the great love, from us, who are gathered here with the deepest regard and respect for your beloved husband and father. We wrap our arms around you. A slideshow of photographs from Vaughan's life has been prepared by his niece Savannah and Wendy, along with help from other family members. The photographs will be rolling afterwards as well, so we will have another opportunity to enjoy them later. Near the end of the slideshow, there is a short time for quiet reflection. Thank you, Master. Thank you, Savannah, and all the contributors for that wonderful compilation. I'd like to ask Peter Brothers, one of Vaughan's oldest friends, to come and share his stories.
Kia ora tātou, and greetings to all. I'm here to speak on behalf of a group of friends of Vaughan's for 55 years almost we've been together. Time goes really quickly, as both Wendy and Bethany referred. We've done a lot of things together. I want to talk a little bit about what we've done together, and I want to talk a little bit about what Vaughan means to us over all that time. The story starts, as others have said, in St Peter's. Well, Vaughan and I once, when we were at university, did a road trip in his old Murray 8, and when we went through Cambridge, we had to stop at St Peter's, and he disappeared for an hour. And he came back, and he said, Matron was there, and she still remembers me. And that lit him up, and I think there was a glow. Vaughan, of course, went through grammar a year behind the people who he hung out with at university because he left at the end of the sixth form. But I do want to acknowledge those from his classmate, Jeff Garrett, and the others who I think have come here today and will be gathering also. Also acknowledge the representatives of Auckland Grammar School here today. As others have said, it was really important to him. When Vaughan got married, we all gathered in Princeton, New Jersey at Wendy's parents' place, and all the single men were put up at the home of one of Wendy's parents' friends. A night before the wedding marked by about 2 o'clock in the morning of a rousing rendition of Insignum Laudem Meretur in the kitchen of this house. Wendy's two brothers were there, and I think they were a little bemused by it, as possibly were the people who lived in the house. But it was a great night. Vaughan and I first met, I think it was in 1969 or 68, in Auckland Grammar School 2C Rugby. I was a member of it. David Simcock was a member of it, even though he can't remember what position he played. Brent Impey was a member of it, who is also now the chair of Auckland New Zealand Rugby Union. There was another team member who went on to become an All Black, so it was a distinguished group. We both started at Auckland University in 1970, and there was a group. There were the science boys, Vaughan, Keith Worsley and Keith Hunter, both of whom have gone before, also sadly. Simon Kemp, Mark Warner, myself. The arts boys, Kip Hazard, Evan Rogerson, David Simcock. Engineers, Jeff Joyce. Others who came round, and if there's others' names I haven't mentioned, please forgive me, it's been a long time. Gib Bogle and Tim Zyman were part of our university group in different ways. When Vaughan first passed away, Gavin approached me and sent me an email saying, look, we're looking together to put it out, can you remember any stories from the days of undergraduate life? I had to write back to him and said, look, I'm awfully sorry, I've thought all the stories I can remember involve alcohol and cards and just one with a stripper. and none of those are probably suitable for an august publication. But they're nice. I'll tell you the story with the stripper later. It's actually a very, very nice story. Life at uni was, as I said, lots of alcohol and a little study. In our second year, the group of us, I think Simon, Keith Worsley, Vaughan and myself, had the same class. On Fridays, our first class was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We got into the habit of meeting in the Kiwi at 10 o'clock when it opened, and it was a point of pride to always make the 2 o'clock Friday lecture and sort of turn up and take notice. Those of us who are a little slow, I think the lecturer was Paul Hafner. Those of us who are a little slow in pure maths, if it got too much, you'd nudge Vaughan, he'd put his hand up, ask a question. The lecturer said, oh, it's a very good question. And we'd all take a micro nap for 5 minutes while the lecturer examined Vaughan's thoughts. So, a group of intersecting worlds. We all met in the student cafe. That was a central place for it. One of the other highlights or lowlights of Vaughan's time there was he entered and won the Dirty Limerick competition. Barry Humphreys, otherwise known as Dame Edna Everidge, awarded him the prize and said, you must be the most filthy person I've ever met. Shook his hand and wiped his hand on his trousers. There we go. Life outside of university has revolved around flats. And in those days, this was some time ago, impoverished students could afford old houses in Parnell and Ponsonby. And I think a lot of our interactions, a lot of our social interactions were in the parties there. I remember one of those parties up in Birdwood Crescent, actually. Vaughan in there, totally sort of in a different space, totally wrapped in what he was doing. He had headphones on, he was listening to Mozart. And he wasn't inebriated, he wasn't affected, he was just listening to Mozart and totally getting off on that. I think a harbinger of his life in music. There was Vaughan's house in Gulf Road, home of many famous pontoon parties. Vaughan's stepfather du jour, Brian, would take part, and they were long and raucous events. Road trips in his Maury 8, I remember. Oh, the Farrelly house. Sue and Libby Farrelly and their parents, Royce and Leslie. That was one of those houses, as you know, when you're young, where it's very welcome. We spent many, many times there hanging out and talking and drinking coffee and talking. The big thing, I think one of the things was, as Philippa referred to, holidays at Parikura Bay in the Bay of Islands. We've had a family home there and Vaughan was a regular visitor. That's where he was introduced to windsurfing, and it was just an immediate click. He took up windsurfing. After 2 days of trying windsurfing, he just would out there 8 hours a day. His hands were raw and bleeding, had blisters and the blister and bloody. He borrowed my mother's yellow rubber washing up gloves and just went out there again. Distinguished also in that first time of learning, while he came back, he was away for about 3 hours, came back behind the Goodfellow launch, the Goodfellows being also linked to him. He'd worked out how to sail downwind, but hadn't quite mastered sailing upwind. but he returned. It was a wonderful group. It was ebbing and flowing. I sat and tried, what do we talk about? And when I read Hermann Hesse's Magister Ludi, The Glass Bead Game, that was a flash of light. Thinking back to those days, and that was at the time, we just talked about everything, and everything led to everything else. And I think we were a group of young men, and increasingly young women, who were curious, who were exploring, and our conversations just flowed one from another. It was a wonderful time of discovery and learning and excitement, and those are great times. Then we all left, and we all went overseas. Vaughan went to Geneva and then to the US, as has been summarised. Mark Warner had already gone to Cambridge. I went to the US, Evan to Europe, Keith Worsley to Canada, Keith Hunter to the UK, Jeff to Hawaii, David Simcock to Canada, Simon Kemp to Germany, Kip and Linda kept the home fires burning. So, some of us returned, some stayed away. But always intertwined, catching up on Christmas home visits. But just as we moved around the world, it seemed we were always running into each other or visiting each other or stopping off. Overlapping. Evan and Vaughan overlapping in Geneva and being part of each other's lives there. Vaughan and family and I overlapping in Berkeley, California, where we spent a couple of years living in the same town and doing those things together. Berkeley, I remember well, two things. One was Calvados. Vaughan always kept a bottle of Calvados, which was very welcome when I came there. But the other thing was my introduction to family life. I was a single man at the time, and I used to visit Vaughan regularly. Breakfast time was always a conversation between he and Wendy about the logistics, getting each of the three children to where they needed to go to school and pastimes afterwards. I used to sit there listening to this elaborate planning thing, thinking, gosh, is this what having a family is like? But it all turned out. But always, and Wendy I think referred to it, always when we met, this instant rapport, a magical thing, a truly magical thing when you look back on it. Evan summed it up best. I met Evan Rogerson. I ran into him when he was in Brussels, I think. And on about the fifth glass of scotch, he looked at me and he said, "It's so nice talking to you, Pete," he said. "I don't have to explain myself to you." And I think for this group who were so woven together, we didn't have to explain ourselves to each other. We knew who we were. And that was a wonderful and comforting thing. Then, over the decades to come, we accumulated families and homes and careers. We'd always catch up, and we always attended. We were the group, we attended each other's significant events. I was at Vaughan's wedding. It was a marvellous thing, and had the joy of being at the 40th celebration last year in Geneva, along with Evan and Mark and Tim Zyman and two of the bridesmaids. It was a great gathering. And of course, the other place we met was, I want to acknowledge, is Bodega Bay. Vaughan and Wendy's place in Bodega Bay. Vaughan's, I think, Turanga Waiwai, for those overseas, the place where you stand, the place where your heart is, the place where you belong. Also a great golf course and great beaches. And in recent years, I want to acknowledge his friend Jack for the kiteboarding, because that was a large part of his life when he was here. I want to acknowledge, and we'll probably hear more about them from Tess, I want to acknowledge Vaughan's, I think, approximately 200 cousins. Because as we travel around New Zealand, we're always stopping off to see his cousins. Wendy mentioned these things, the surf and turf. It started off Vaughan and I hopping in a car and driving out of Auckland with just two rules. Every time we passed a golf course, we had to stop and play 9 holes, and every time we came to a beach, Vaughan would go kiteboarding and I'd just play in the surf. And then Jeff Joyce joined us, and Gib Bogle and Simon Kemp. Kip was going to come one year, except he did something to his body. And it turned into women, wives and partners came well. It turned into a wonderful odyssey, and that was a great thing. The Cape Reinga to Bluff trip, which a number of us sort of travelled from Cape Reinga to Bluff under our own steam. Vaughan was going to come and paddle down the Whanganui River with us, from Taumarunui all the way to Whanganui. Delayed because of heavy rain and the river was closed and he had to go off to a wedding of some cousins. But he did join us on that trip for sailing across Cook Strait with Tessa as well on the boat, and that was a lovely trip for him to be there. We'd done that for a decade, I think, every year for a year. We were planning for next year a 2-week surf and turf, and so there you go. So, I wanted to sort of wind up this by saying who was Vaughan? And what are the key things that we, I think, might remember from him? He was multi-talented in music and languages, Marie-Claude Ratier, a long life friend of Wendy, once commented to, French woman, she commented to me that when she listened to Vaughan, she couldn't tell he wasn't a native speaker. Mark Warner commented that he knew Spanish well enough to read Spanish philosophers in the original language. A committed barista, truly committed. Very dangerous. He opened his laptop and would show you several minutes worth of his latte art. Outside of that, one of the first words that came to me was kind. A deep, deep kindness. So this is the story about the stripper. Back in the day, when we were students, the engineers used to have an annual smoker. Down on Wynyard Street, there was an old shed with sawdust on the floor, and young engineers would gather there once a year and drink a lot of beer. Who knew? Vaughan came along one year, I think just for the interest of sociological observation. That year, the organisers had organised for a stripper to show up. The arrangement was she was there was music. Everyone had to stand 12 foot back, and she did what strippers do. As the music started and the dance proceeded, the crowd got closer and closer and closer, and there was loud cat calling and lots of music, and it pressed in on her, and she started to look worried. And she looked, you could tell. She was actually genuinely scared. No reason most drunken young engineers wouldn't know what to do if they ever caught a naked young woman, but she was, you could tell, she was genuinely frightened. From the back of the crowd, Vaughan forced his way through, got the girl under one arm, picked up her boombox and her clothes with the other arm, barreled through the crowd, unstoppable, out to the front door, and got her off and on her way. And I've always remembered that, because apart from the entertaining factor of alcohol and strippers, to me it showed an unusual degree of empathy and a willingness to act, to look after other people. And I think that was amplified throughout his life in many, many different ways. He was active, golf and kiteboarding and rugby and tennis and squash and cycling. Curious and always up for the new. When he was in Los Angeles and he had to go across country to take up the job in Philadelphia, he told me he'd always wanted to have a big motorcycle trip, so he went out and bought a Kawasaki 1000. I didn't know he'd even ridden a motorcycle before. He rode that cross country. And he turned up to see me in Colorado, and we had a long conversation about the fact that when you're on a large motorcycle, going down a motorway at high speed, if you want to turn left, you actually turn the handlebars a little bit to the right. It's called cross steering. But he'd gone out and just experimented with that, and with his analytic mind had worked the whole thing out. Even-tempered. Over 50 years, never a crossword. I can't remember one disagreement with him. What an amazing thing. The only time he was known to sort of possibly lose his temper was on the golf course. He had a wicked slice. And when it came into play, he would give vent to language of such colourful nature that the leaves on trees would curl up. Rabbits would stop scampering and put their paws over their ears. A very fluent and man of expressing his emotions in those ways. And possibly the last thing I'll mention, but there's a devoted husband and family man. And I know this because he told me often. I think we all know that. And I'll finish. Look, that was Vaughan, a rich and wonderful person. And I wanted to finish by just reflecting a little bit on what it meant to our friendship group. And I think it was this. It was when we were with each other, we knew each other so well, we spent so much time together, we've talked about so many things, that we lived as a group in that true Buddhist sense of living life in the moment. We were just there with each other. Not necessarily talking about things of great import, just being there, being who we are, and truly enjoying who we are. Kurt Vonnegut, in his novel Cat's Cradle, talks about a karass. It's a group of people who, because of the strings of destiny, are just brought together and live their lives together, even if they don't know why. And I think that was what Vaughan was as a part of us, for us. One of us, a huge affinity, a wonderful, rich and warm and delightful person to know, and something I think I and we are always glad has been part of our lives. Thank you, and good luck to all of us.
Ngā mihi nui. Thank you, Peter. Now we'll be hearing from David Gould, representing the University of Auckland, and then Gavin Martin, representing the Royal Society of New Zealand. They are co-founders along with Vaughan, Marston Condor and Rod Downey of the New Zealand Mathematics Research Institute. If you are part of the greater mathematics tribe, you know them well. Over the years, they have been variously teacher, student, collaborator, colleague, and of course, close personal friends with Vaughan. Their tributes will serve to introduce them, I'm sure. David.
Wendy, Bethany, Ian and Alice, you've lost a great man, as we've lost a great friend. A few years ago I retired, and when I was cleaning up my office, I came across a number of sheets of photographs about this size, and on each sheet was about 40 photographs of the Stage 3 students of 1971. And so there was a little photograph for each student, maybe about postage stamp size, maybe a bit bigger, with the name underneath. So you could take this along to your class and try to learn the names of the students. But there was one missing. There was a name, VFR Jones, but the photograph was missing. Anyway, he was enrolled in this large analysis class, which I taught along with Lynn Gilmore. And that's when I first came across Vaughan Jones. He wasn't blank, despite the photograph. A couple of years later, I taught a course, a master's course in knot theory, and you'll probably see a couple of pictures on the back of this of knots. A nice cartoon about the traffic jams in Kerikeri. Vaughan didn't enrol in that course, so I can't claim that I somehow got him started on knot theory. But since he died, Peter, his cousin, once removed, is that right, isn't it? Who was enrolled in that class, told me that he had actually discussed some of what I'd talked about in the class, but I don't really think this helped Vaughan at all. Although, interestingly, the topic of their discussion was a pair of knots. I won't go into the details, which couldn't be easily distinguished in those days, but subsequently Vaughan discovered what's called now called the Jones polynomial, and it's easy to distinguish between those two knots using the Jones polynomial. Instead, Vaughan enrolled in a class taught by Mike Lennon, and that really inspired him, and that's what got him started, I am sure, on his work in functional analysis and the wider area. Gavin will talk more about this, no doubt. Another big influence in those days was Paul Hafner. It was nice to see the photograph of Vaughan with Mike and Paul in the display of photographs. Quite a few times Vaughan said to me that, Paul, you helped him a lot in those days. You might say he didn't really much, but getting him started with the scholarship to go to, or at least to apply to have the scholarship to go to Geneva was something that he was very pleased about. So, well, in 1990, as we've heard, he was awarded the Mathematics then top medal, the Fields Medal. It's awarded every 4 years to the world's top mathematicians, 3 or 4 at a time, only every 4 years, so it's an average of 1 a year or perhaps less. The recipients must all be under the age of 40, and of course Vaughan was then. The University of Auckland wasn't too long in recognising this distinguished alumnus and awarded him an honorary doctorate, as you saw. It also awarded him a position, a part-time position as a distinguished alumni professor. It was an interesting process to go through, making sure that this position was offered to him, because at that stage the university hadn't done that sort of thing. So there was a first for the university. Vaughan insisted, as part of the terms of his appointment, that he should be allowed to do more or less what he wanted. And in those days, the duties were as determined by the head of department, so it was kind of easy for the head of department to say, you do this. and in Vaughan's case, he wanted to somehow do something for all of New Zealand mathematics, not just the University of Auckland. And as a result of that, we had a mathematical workshop. The first of those was held in Huia, out toward the Manukau Heads. A nice spot, but not ideal for windsurfing, as we discovered. When we went and looked at the place, the tide was in and it looked really good. Great place to windsurf. But then when Vaughan went out to do his windsurfing, it turned out that the tide wasn't quite so in. In any case, the water's about that deep for a kilometre out toward the harbour, so it wasn't really much fun. One day he went out into the harbour proper, and the tide was going out. He told me later on the tide was going out, roaring out as it does out to the Manukau harbour, and he got washed out to the heads, and he thought, oh, this is not going to be very good. So he scrambled ashore and grabbed onto some rocks with his windsurfer and held on tight for the next 2 hours or something till the tide stopped going out, and then he was able to come back in again. One of the things about that was that he decided that he would like to continue these. So he travelled around New Zealand and he kept a diary of various places he went to. What he wanted to do was to identify places where we might have these workshops in the future. And he gave me this diary when he got back to Auckland and said, now try and work out where we're going to have the next one. And his favourite place was Tolaga Bay, of those places. And in a way it was ideal because it was small. Basically the mathematics people, the students and staff, took over the town. I don't know what the people in the pub thought when all these mathematicians turned up and took over the place. The accommodation wasn't ideal there, and the second year a storm blew down someone's tent, and we've never actually been back to Tolaga Bay for that. He set the stage for these workshops and kept them on track. I remember one workshop in Nelson when a speaker who was pretty proud of what he'd done was talking about something or other, and somebody asked him, would he explain this term that he's using? And the speaker took the questioner literally and said yes, meaning he would mind explaining what it was gone about. And he proceeded to go without explaining it. And, well, the next session, Vaughan decided to appoint himself as the speaker, and basically he said, this is how I want these talks to go. And he proceeded to give one of his wonderful lectures. I mean, it's been mentioned already, Philippa mentioned his wonderful lectures. They were outstanding. And he showed us, and not that speaker I'm afraid, because it didn't seem to rub off, but he showed us how it should be done, and he certainly did it properly. Sorry, I need to read some things. He would also sit during these lectures and ask questions. No doubt some of those questions he saw as filling the role. The speaker hadn't quite covered things properly, so this was a way of others understanding. Sometimes they were quite deep questions, all over the place, all sorts of interesting questions. He would interact with the students. He would talk to anyone. Remember one time at Napier, there was a bit of fuss in the evening, about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. People said, hey, Vaughan's singing. And we all went out onto the Marine Parade there where there's a big sound shell, and he'd encountered a bunch of teenagers, boys and girls, and a couple of girls started singing. They were wonderful voices, and Vaughan joined in them, this wonderful harmony of the singing. Yes. One time, the first of the workshops we had at Huia, the accommodation was pretty meagre, and we had to do our own cleaning. So Vaughan put up a whiteboard, put up a roster and said, here are the jobs that need to be doing. And one of those jobs was cleaning the toilets. And what was the first name that he put on there? Vaughan Jones. So he would go from one extreme to the other, this amazing intellect and doing tedious jobs like cleaning toilets. He would run the barbecue at the workshop dinner, and that's enough of that one. Money to run the workshops was a bit of a challenge, but Vaughan's freely given prestige and wisdom, great advice, enabled us to get money together for those workshops. Eventually, we had to set up something to oversee the workshops in a loose sort of fashion, and the New Zealand Mathematics Research Institute was established with Vaughan as its foundation chair of the board of directors, right up until the beginning of this year when he decided that it was time to pass that on. But for the first 20 years or so, he was the founding chair of the board. In the early days of the 20th century, the government set up these centres of research excellence, and once again Vaughan's wisdom and prestige and all that sort of thing helped establish the the New Zealand Institute of Mathematics and its Applications, which was co-directed by Marston and Vaughan. Unfortunately, it was too successful, and the rules didn't really respect that sort of success. Since then, Vaughan himself has made generous contributions to allow the workshops to continue, and we've been very privileged to have such a man. The university itself got its money's worth, I think, pretty well every year. He gave lectures in January. People were invited from all over the place to attend these lectures. They were wonderful lectures. He really took us to the frontiers of so many different aspects of his research in a very clear style. Oh, talking about the prestige of the Fields Medal, that was one of the advantages for the university, having someone with a Fields Medal on its books. Thanks, Akadi. One time when I was staying with Wendy and Vaughan in Berkeley, we drove into Berkeley. Vaughan drove us in together, and he just drove into this parking building, and there was a parking spot. Oh, I said, oh, that's great. He said, no, there's a sign there that says, Vaughan Jones, Fields medalists, Nobel Prize winners, they had their own special parking spot, and nobody was allowed to park there. You'd get your car dragged away if you park there. So Berkeley at least recognised the prestige, and I think the University of Auckland also recognised the prestige of having such a person. He also helped us locally in the mathematics department. For example, we were trying to fill a chair, and Vaughan was on the search and select committee, and his advice there was, well, way beyond anyone else's advice that we could possibly have got, I'm sure. And I think we made the right decision. Thank you, Vaughan, for that. As we've heard, he received many prestigious awards, the Fields Medal, honorary doctorates from all over the place. I'd like to come back to the Rutherford Medal that's been mentioned. He was the first recipient of this. So, and it was presented to him by the Prime Minister. Well, actually, it wasn't. You saw a picture of him being presented with the Rutherford Medal, but it wasn't the real one. That was the real one. They hadn't a medal for him at the time, so they gave him a cardboard replica of some sort. and the Prime Minister awarded him this, here's a cardboard replica of what we're going to award you at some stage. Well, 2 or 3 years later, I was talking with Vaughan about this, and he said, oh, you know, they've never actually given me the real thing. So when I got back to my laptop, I put together a letter to the Prime Minister saying I was really proud of the New Zealand government establishing this medal in honour of top scientists in the country, and that you presented this to Vaughan was really wonderful. But your alchemy hasn't worked. The darn thing's still made of cardboard. Where's the Well, I didn't say that to Jim. Took a while to get a reply, but eventually I got this reply to say that they had to spend a bit of time working out what to call the medal. Actually, at the time, it was not called the Rutherford Medal, it was called the New Zealand Science and Technology Gold Medal. It took a while to design it and then start to make it, but eventually Vaughan was awarded his medal. And of course, he's had other honours from the country as well. Well, as it says here, I can smile because he has lived. I can see what he's left. Thank you, Vaughan. Thank you.
Minutes, right? Morena, tēnā koutou katoa. No nongataha te maunga, no rotorua te roto. Ko Gavin Martin, toko ingoa. Kia kone au moa te aparangi te Royal Society of New Zealand. Ea te aroa. Kua hinga te tautara e te wea nui a tāne. Ko tonga oranga me tāne mahi e whakaranga oe te ai te whenua. Ka here tōna naru. Ka here tōna naru. Hi, I'm Gavin Martin. I'm a mathematician. Long-time friend of Vaughan's, despite his nearly 3-decade crusade to drown me under the guise of teaching water sports. I'm on the Academy Executive, and as I said in my introduction, I'm here to represent the Royal Society. What I said in my introduction is a Maori saying about this situation. It is, a totara has fallen in the forest of Tāne. His life and work have shaken the earth. The tremors will continue. So the sad thing about being last is I have piles and piles of things to read out about his achievements and decorations and so forth, but everyone said that, and that's really great because that leaves more time for math. Without doubt, Vaughan is New Zealand's most celebrated mathematical scientist and one of Te Aparangi's most distinguished fellows. And you can tell the really distinguished fellows because they more or less uniformly hate their portraits. So the Royal Society has this process whereby formal portraits are taken, and you saw it before in the thing, and you could, Vaughan thinking, what am I doing here? He totally eschewed that sort of formality. But it's great to have that picture anyway. So yeah, he's won numerous awards, including the Fields Medal, blah, blah, blah. It's all been said. Okay, but it's fallen to me to talk about Vaughan's mathematical work in von Neumann algebras, subfactor theory, knot theory, braid groups, three manifolds, planar algebras, conformal and quantum field theory, and quantum computing. And so while Marsden rolls up the screens and finds some pens for me, I'll say a few words of thanks. So firstly, thanks to the family, if you're listening and watching, for allowing us and supporting us in this endeavour for this memorial. It means a lot to many of us. Next, I'd like to thank the University of Auckland for giving us this venue and supporting us, and for the things to come. And finally, I'd really like to thank Marsden, because this is basically all his work. So he has spent a long time putting this together, dealing with the people involved, giving us our strict time limits, which my previous speakers ignored. Okay. So I mentioned a whole lot of math things before, and the boards are still not up, Marsden. Von Neumann algebras, subfactor, knot theory, braid groups, quantum computer, blah, blah, blah. So what do all of those things I talked about have in common? Well, until Vaughan, virtually nothing. So that is one of his great mathematical achievements, to bring these disparate areas of mathematics together. Johnny von Neumann is a personal hero of Vaughan. I happen to know that. And about 1936, he introduced some algebraic structures with a colleague, Murray, called von Neumann algebras now. And what they did was try to study operators on Hilbert spaces. So I'm going to keep using these words. You might as well think I'm continuing to speak in Maori if you want. But this is sort of where Vaughan's mathematical journey begins. So in case you're thinking that you might understand a little bit of what I'm talking about, I'd like to reiterate that the things we're talking about are hugely infinite dimensional things. And what you want to do is to try and understand them, because these bounded operators on Hilbert spaces basically give you the way of making observables and physical experiments and those sorts of things. And von Neumann was motivated by applications in quantum mechanics. So factors are a very special sort of von Neumann algebra, and Vaughan started studying these in his thesis. Okay, so the spectral theorem, which is another big theorem in mathematics, a very general thing about how to deal with objects of like this, tell us that in order to classify these objects, we only need to look at factors. And factors are a very special sort of von Neumann algebra. So Vaughan, in the early 80s, started looking at the way one factor sits inside another. And we're talking about, very complicated things, one sits inside another. And he proved at that time quite remarkable theorem. The import was not widely recognized in the mathematical community till a lot later. Actually, a comment that I read in the Times Higher Education the other day about an Australian Vice-Chancellor saying that people shouldn't do incremental things. Like he's smart enough to tell what's incremental and what's not. When you do something like this, 10 years down the track, you find, aha, this is the real key information that we need and the tool that we need. So in any case, he proved quite remarkably that the way one object sits inside another, there's a continuous way, and every value greater than 4 was allowed. But between 4 and 0, only special numbers were achieved, 4 cos squared pi over n. If you ask Vaughan what his favourite numbers are, I'm sure he would say 4 cos squared pi over n. But anyway, in improving this theorem, what he did was he identified the occurrence of entirely new sorts of symmetries that had not been seen in mathematics, especially in this area of functional analysis that he was working. And the things he saw were reminiscent of other mathematical structures called Hecker algebras. His basic construction showed there are very important and interesting combinatorial structures at play. And over the next 2 decades, 3 decades, he developed these combinatorial structures into a theory of planar algebras. So, you see something you did in the early 80s and it takes you 30 years to work out. Welcome to mathematics. So these combinatorial structures revealed representations of the Bray group, and the Bray group is the group that encodes the symmetries of knots and links. The special subfactors that Vaughan looked at had something called a trace, like the sum of the diagonal entries of a matrix. And when you took the trace of these invariants he constructed, we got a polynomial. That polynomial is called the Jones polynomial. But you see, we started out in one area, one room of mathematics, functional analysis, the way hugely infinite dimensional objects fit one inside the other. And suddenly, we're talking about knots and links in 3 space. That's an amazing transition. Okay, so that discovery resulted in a flurry of new research in the area, which combined with recent results in low-dimensional topology, resolved many unanswered and important questions in mathematics. Some of these, for instance, the Tate conjectures, date back over 100 years. Mathematicians had been working on these problems in 100 years and not making much progress. Why? because they were fiddling over here, trying all the sorts of tricks, all the low-dimensional topology and geometry. Big theories were built up over here, but the answer was over there. In 1986, Vaughan suggested a connection with his knot polynomials and field theories. These are the theories introduced by Dirac in his efforts to quantize the electromagnetic field in the 1920s. Actually, Tate, whose conjectures were ultimately saved, also looked at knots and links from the theory of vortices in electromagnetism. So strange links there. But at any rate, this observation of Vaughan's was proved correct by Witten. And with Witten's work and subsequent things, quantization of gravity and those sorts of things, which I might come back to, maybe not, Witten was awarded the Fields Medal at the same time as Vaughan, not for any joint work, they separately got them, but for overlapping work. The mathematical community at that time had come to realize the importance of these new ideas and objects in much wider application. In fact, speaking of wide application, recently Mike Friedman and his Microsoft group showed the calculation of Jones polynomials a universal problem for quantum computing. So Microsoft are now thinking about building a quantum computer using Chern-Simons theory, pulling out observables using Jones polynomial. Go figure. Actually, these ideas are important because knots and links are more robust objects than strings of ones and zeros. If you have a string of ones and zeros and you look in the middle and some ones and zeros are missing, what do you do? Go back to start, do it all again. But if you're computing using knots and links, you see a knot, well, a bit of the knot is missing, but you basically will know how to fill that in, unless you're very unlucky. So these sorts of calculations have a robustness which addresses the decoherence problem in quantum computing. Okay, well, enough of that. So David has spoken of Vaughan's activity putting mathematics in New Zealand on the map. Most of the names of very, very famous people that I mentioned in my talk, and a lot of others, have come to New Zealand, have given lectures, and have been part of our community because of what Vaughan did. Mathematics in New Zealand, many of us personally have benefited enormously from what Vaughan has done for the community. In fact, in many ways, his activities have made it much easier to be a high-quality mathematician in New Zealand than it ever has been in the past. And that is reflected, I think, by the quality of mathematics and mathematicians in this country at the moment, both up and down the spectrum. New people coming through and older people like us leaving. So it's a fabulous thing. So I want to leave you with two memories. The first one, David mentioned the conference in Huea, the first NZMRI workshop. Well, throughout the NZMRI workshop, it was Vaughan and I's solemn duty to do two things. The first was to organise and run the barbecue, and the second was to avoid David's walk wherever it was going. And we had actually a spectacular record in those things. But in any case, the first NZMRI barbecue was held up in my house. We had a house in Titirangi. And we had about 40 mathematicians there for this barbecue, typical New Zealand barbecue. Vaughan and I were working at the barbecue, making these sausages and steaks for everybody. And then Vaughan looked at me and said, "Gav, I think we've set your neighbour's fence on fire." Yeah. Now, what is the very, very last thing you want if you're dealing with having set your neighbour's fence on fire? It's a big fence like this, but it was covered in dry leaves of ivy and stuff like that, so it just went whoosh. So what you absolutely do not want is 40 mathematicians trying to help you put up the fire. Vaughan standing there with a wry look. And my last thought is actually something David mentioned, which I remember differently. And that is the Napier Conference. And these conferences are set up for families. In fact, that was one of the main reasons to have them, and sort of an important part of the activity that goes on. A lot of us were quite young at those times and had young kids. So at this conference, there must have been 20, maybe 25 young children, so from ages 5 to 15, something like that. And what actually happened, David, so you can take some notes for next time, is that Vaughan had been eyeing the sound show all day. And after dinner, so we had a communal dinner, he decided that he wanted to sing in the sound show. And he didn't want to go over there by himself. So what he did was he rounded up all of these kids. And they all marched with Vaughan in the centre, like the Pied Piper, over to the sound show. I happen to know because I had 2 daughters who both wound up being singers, accompanying him on the sound show. And I don't remember the music being quite as beautiful as you suggested, but nevertheless, it was quite enjoyable. So we have all lost a great friend. This is a tragedy for New Zealand, but we'll get over it and we'll go on and we'll keep building. Kia hara tamarino, kia whakapapa ponamo tu moana, kia tere te kahera hoi mua I te haurihi. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Gavin. 8 seems like a sort of a notional number for a bunch of mathematicians, but those stories were so enjoyable, and thank you for sharing them with us. So, as we've heard, Vaughan was a musician. He played the violin and he loved to sing. King of the Road by Roger Miller was a favourite and is a family anthem, as we saw in the clip earlier. You'll enjoy this. Sing along if you know it. You can hum, there's room for finger snapping. Now I'd like to ask Vaughan's sister, Tessa Jones, to tell us something of Vaughan's family life.
Well, if you heard me in that performance, you know that Vaughan got the genes for singing. Tēnā koutou katoa. Je m'appelle Tessa, la sœur de Vaughan. Vaughan did his PhD in French, so we used to speak French occasionally. Have you got the
Yes.
thing? Oh, or shall I just talk to you and you can...
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I'm more comfortable out here, really. Can you hear me? Oh,
You can hold on to this. Right?
all right. That sounds like fun.
Works. No. Sorry.
I've always enjoyed lecturing in an interactive way, but if you can't hear me, I'll have to give it up and be sad. Okay, I stand before you today amongst members of Vaughan's colleagues, friends and family as the representative of Vaughan's New Zealand family in particular, and with the blessing of his family in America. Do you want me to take that?
If not, yeah.
Thanks. There are also strong friendships that Vaughan has maintained around the world, several of whom I have met in their countries and in ours. It is good that we are mindful of them today as well. If it were not for the current difficulty in crossing borders, some of them would be here in person. Vaughan's family, both in America and in New Zealand, have enjoyed sharing their homes with these travellers and welcome them back. I'd like to give thanks to the people who've organised this event, and particularly Marston Connor, Savannah and Misty, my children, Pete Brothers, Gavin Martin, Bree Gruby, Philippa Brothers, and also the New Zealand Mathematics Research Institute and the University of Auckland. So I have the great privilege of being the keeper of Vaughan's, of our early childhood memories.
Thanks, Ivana. If we get you set up well, then you can speak comfortably.
Okay, that'd be good, thank you.
This one should go on here. That can go in your pocket. Does it the pocket?
No, it
open?
doesn't have
No.
pocket, I
Ah,
just have to hold it.
okay.
It's a fake pocket. I didn't realise it was a fake pocket when I bought it.
Go ripped off.
Let it never be said that I bought a jacket with a fake pocket.
Okay, you can hold that.
Thank you.
Is that all right?
It's on record. Okay. So my earliest memory of Vaughan would be when he was about 1. We were living in Drury, south of Auckland. And our mother left us alone, and what I remember was a large room with a sea green lino floor, 4 doors and 2 windows, and a fireplace. As she left the room, I would have been 4, she said, "Tessa, don't tease Vaughan." Now, I have since discovered that the subconscious does not compute the negative. And so I would have heard, "Tessa, tease Vaughan." Now, not wanting to get into trouble and realising there could be consequences to this, but at the same time not wanting to be disobedient, I said, as soon as she had gone, "Vaughan, there's a lion!" Well, Vaughan immediately realised what his role was, and he screamed with the full might of his toddler lungs. Well, enter stage left our mother, exit stage right Tessa, and in the time it took for her to gather the perplexed toddler, and in my memory a rather large stick, think of a hockey stick, I had established my hiding place under the house, where I could hear the 2 of them marching around, calling out my name. I chose my exit in a timely fashion in order to avoid corporal punishment. There's a photo of Vaughan about this time. Conda? I mean, Marston. Sorry. There, he's playing games on his phone. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Where's the one of him with the macrocarpentry?
Oh, back there.
Yeah, that's the one. That's Vaughan at 1. That macrocarpa tree is just outside stage right, the aforementioned stage right. And Vaughan's establishing his early love of trees, admiring the macrocarpa. So I learned not to talk about lions in front of Vaughan, and Vaughan learned not to scream, and we became good friends. Many years later, I told this story at the ceremony you have seen in Kyoto, the award presenting ceremony. And Vaughan enjoyed the story immensely. He didn't remember it, of course. So when Vaughan was 2, we moved from the house that had the macrocarpa trees and the lions to another smaller house in Rutensamen, which had a large paddock outside it. And one day, Dad brought us home from work a pedal car, which was made of very heavy metal. He'd had it manufactured specially. He designed it and manufactured it specially for us to play with, a real big, strong pedal car. So we managed to get it out into the paddock and, of course, down the hill, but that was as far as we could go. We couldn't get it back up the hill home again. And unfortunately, that night, the pedal car stayed in the paddock and was not there in the morning. The road must have been a bit too close, I think. So we were reduced to our usual games of collecting cow paddies to make sculptures with. We had paper bags and tablespoons for this purpose, and the cow paddies had to be not too wet, otherwise they wouldn't make it home to be part of our sculptures. But on a cleaner note, we used to enjoy picking blackberries as well for Mum's jam pot. Okay, from there we moved to Red Hill, where Mum and Dad had been building a house, and it was close to Nana and Grandad, Dad's parents, which was good for us. We had paddocks and trees and an old Māori pā to explore. It was good fun. I started school in Papakura and was very excited to learn 1 + 1 = 2. Our father brought me a blackboard, and I would stand it up after school, complete with chalk, to teach Vaughan what I had learned that day. He was an excellent student, as you know. I recalled this story at the above-mentioned medal award event in Kyoto. It was the one actually where Vaughan's wearing the rugby gear in the picture there. I recognised the audience. And afterwards, one of the people in the audience said to me, "So you were Vaughan's first mathematics teacher?" And I said, "Yes, well, if you put it that way." Feeling proud, and not having recognised that myself. If there's any mathematicians in the audience who are losing their way with the basics, just come and see me afterwards and I'll set you on a path to stardom. When Vaughan was 5, we moved from Papakura to Herne Bay, very close to Ponsonby School, which is where Vaughan started school. His early childhood career with mathematics was not without pitfalls. Vaughan was in a classroom 2 doors down the corridor from me. One day I was called to his classroom to do something about a situation that had arisen. There was a very distressed Vaughan in the corner, making noises similar to what have happened when he was 1. So I think there might have been a lion in the classroom. I took Vaughan and we went home, which was good for me because I was in trouble for talking in class anyway. So we went home and played, and that was lovely. We had a lovely time at home. I think Vaughan was a gifted child who'd been looking forward to going to school with me, but quickly became frustrated by the classroom situation at that time, which separated us, and involved 40 pupils, 1 teacher, and corporal punishment. He was at the bottom of his class and things were not looking good. Things were different at home, where he was regarded as a lovely, chubby little boy. Vaughan and I would have fun making bows and arrows and playing with the neighbourhood children. We had club rooms under the house, and I used to write plays, which we would perform. On Sundays, we would drive to visit relatives, Mum's sister Doreen and her 3 children, Donald, Ellen and Lynette, who are here today, our grandparents or Dad's family, who provided us with 4 uncles, Eric, Ron, David and Fred, 2 aunties, Mary, who's here today, and Betty. These are people that Vaughan has made a good job of maintaining his relationship with as an adult. We would be allowed an ice cream in a cone on the way, and I would always finish mine first. I suspected Vaughan of eating slowly in order to annoy me at the end. But he would share his ice cream with me. Isn't that lovely? Fortunately, we both like chocolate ice cream. And this is an example of his generosity. I was told at Kyoto that he was very popular because he shared his mathematics. He would be thinking of something and he would talk to somebody in Russia who was also thinking of that. And that would help them. That would help mathematics to grow. And in those days, mathematicians and scientists in general were talking in isolation and hiding their ideas from each other because they wanted to be the first to discover it. But Vaughan did get the medal, not because he did that and that, but because he did that. And so, yeah, his generosity is something that really needs to be acknowledged. The necklace that Wendy's wearing when she spoke to us earlier, so eloquently, and Bethany too, thank you, Bethany and Wendy, for those beautiful talks, was given to Wendy by Vaughan when he got his medal at Kyoto, with thanks for her support. And, you know, it was a big thing supporting Vaughan, I imagine. So Mum's Uncle Tudor had a 500-acre sheep farm on the coast at Tekatu Point, east of Warkworth. Our school holidays were spent exploring the sea, the beaches, native bush and the farm. Vaughan would lie in the sun on his lilo, enjoying the movement of the waves for hours. There he is. And I think there's some more photos that we can show at this stage too. That's Vaughan at Tekatu, and me, and that's Mum in the middle. Those were 2 hitchhikers that Uncle Tudor had picked up, as was his wont. Next one, thanks. I love this photo. This was a wedding of some friends, and Vaughan was enjoying the cake. They wanted to take a photo, and Uncle Tudor decided to click the camera before everybody was quite ready. You can't really see it there, but Vaughan was wearing a suit that our mother had made and was very well dressed. So he has a reputation for underdressing, and he didn't get this from my mother, I just want to say. Okay, next one, thanks, Marston. And that's Vaughan with A.H. Reid in front of a kauri tree. A.H. Reid wrote a book about kauri and autographed it for us. When we get Vaughan's ashes, some of them are going to come to New Zealand, and I have a kauri tree waiting to be planted out, which is going to have some of Vaughan's ashes to feed it and look after it. I have also an avocado tree that's flourishing and has our mother's ashes, and some of his ashes are going to go there. Next one, thanks, Conda. Oh, yeah. When Vaughan was 8, our family decided that our mother, who was very photogenic, would take advantage of the offer to travel overseas with Uncle Tudor, who was not only a farmer but also a freelance photographer. And this sort of photo is one that he would have taken. She would be his model, posing in front of places like Buckingham Palace, and La Tour Eiffel. This meant that Vaughan and I would go to boarding school for the year she was away. I remember Vaughan protesting, but I was keen, having read Enid Blyton's Famous Five and books like What Katie Did at School. I was actually very disappointed with the real thing and refused to return when the year was up. But Vaughan blossomed, and I believe St. Peter's was his saving grace, scholastically speaking. Thank you, St. Peter's. My school had outing weekends twice a month, and Dad would take me to visit Vaughan at St. Peter's. It was a strange feeling, like he didn't really belong to us anymore. We'd arrive at the chapel, and he'd be up the front in his uniform with the other boys, and we'd have to sit up the back waiting for him to be free. And then we would go to the hot pools that were in the area, and we'd go and visit Uncle Eric, who had a farm at Matamata. Our parents remarried. I don't know that I've said they separated, but they did. Our parents remarried, and Dad's second marriage did not last long, which was fortunate for Vaughan, who found it difficult to fit in with the new family. Dad's third marriage to Faye, who is here today, was a different story, and a strong bond has been maintained with Faye and her children, particularly Lindy and Colin. Vaughan went back to living with our mother soon after he started at Auckland Grammar School. Our stepfather Brian built a room for Vaughan downstairs, and I think he was pretty happy there. He started beating me at chess at that stage, consistently. I mean, he could beat me sometimes, but then every time he'd win. And I think that must have, maybe a bit later than that, but yeah, I'll tell you that later. Anyway, he had a good time at Westmere, and we used to, we were beside the sea, and there was an inlet with an estuary, and at night we could go down and catch flounder with a tilly lamp and a stick, a broom handle with a nail in the end of it. That was good fun. Similar to what you can do at Duda's Beach. So I left home around about then, probably because he was beating me at chess. And we lived quite separate lives for a while, but then as young adults we caught up again. Vaughan was at Auckland University and I was at Otago Medical School. Vaughan made the effort to come down and stay with me in Dunedin during one of our holidays in fifth year. He would have been about 20. I had been given our grandmother's Morris Minor, and we explored the carburettor and the head gasket, which were in need of attention. We had a great time with that. And Vaughan started his life of confiding with me. I'm not going to tell you all the things that he confided in me, but he was not only a generous person, he was very honourable too, and his confidings were about what he should do to be honourable in certain situations. At that stage, he confided in me. I don't know if he confided in his friends as well, but I hope he doesn't mind my telling you this. But he was concerned to know, he was worried about whether he was a genius or not. And I thought that was a very strange thing to be worried about. But as things have progressed, it's probably quite a reasonable thing to be concerned about. He was worried about, I think he was concerned not from the point of vanity, to set himself above people, but I think his concern was that he didn't want really to be isolated and above people. And that's part of his character of dressing down often, was, to bring himself down a little bit, because obviously maybe he was a genius. I think a genius is someone who can put things together. And you've told us, Given, that he was really, and David, that he did that. He was good at bringing those branches of mathematics together. So that's a genius trait, I think. But he was concerned also not only about being isolated from other people, but what the responsibility of being a genius in this world might mean, and how much time he should be devoted to intellectual pursuits versus other things. I think he actually managed this very well. He kept up other things as well as his mathematical pursuits in an extremely favourable time honourable way. Right, I decided at some stage that Vaughan and I would have some fun in common if I learnt to windsurf. Vaughan was a patient teacher, as many of you will know, and kindly supported me with equipment. I was going to tell you that about one time when I arrived in Paris to meet him, and I had 4 suitcases, which Vaughan thought was hilarious. But fortunately, he was strong and able to help me through the metro with these 4 suitcases to the tiny little hotel room that he'd organised for us. So my defence of the 4 suitcases really is windsurfing. I mean, you know how bulky those wetsuits are and all the gear that you have to carry around with you in case it gets cold. So, however, my windsurfing pursuits were not as good as Vaughan's, and I had to be rescued quite a few times. I won't go into detail about that. But time marches on, and those are a few of my Vaughan stories. It was easy to make him chuckle, and I started sending him funny cards. Next one, thanks. Oh yes, I'll tell you that story, that's right. This reminds me of our mother. Because she used to sit downstairs eating her breakfast, and Vaughan would descend from upstairs where his room was, and the top part of the stairs occluded. You appeared foot first down the stairs, and she told me that she used to love seeing those big thighs coming down the stairs. I know what she means. They're hard gain, those muscles, you know. There's a lot of effort goes into that. All right, so can we have the next one, thanks? Yes. Now this is a card I saw in a shop and I thought, oh, I'll send that to Vaughan. What is the name of your first pet? There he is at the gate, at the pearly gates. So I sent that to Vaughan. He did think it was funny. And I later thought, well, you know, just to continue the joke a little bit, I emailed him that his first pet was called Bluey. Bluey was a little grey kitten, and I had Curly, who was a little dark kitten. So I hope that Vaughan has remembered Bluey and passed through the gates. Okay, if not, if he's listening, you can go there now, Vaughan. Vaughan has been a huge presence in our lives and has made a contribution that has been honoured in many ways. It is hard to believe that he is gone. I went to a mathematics lecture that he gave one time about dimensions. He gave it in words rather than mathematics. It was a public lecture in Nelson. It was really good. And the takeaway message was that there are many dimensions. So I would like, if you mathematicians can work it out, please. Can we have a dimension where Vaughan hasn't gone? I just find it so hard to believe that he's gone, you know? He was so big. When Vaughan was in a room, you knew. Well, I did. So, we are grateful for his time with us. And I want to make one last light-hearted remark I once made that made Vaughan laugh. It was when we, as a family, that's our dad and that's Faye with her hand, there's Wendy and Vaughan, there's me, and that's our mother. Our parents were not well-educated people, although apparently Dad did start a law degree. Mum left school at the end of the... she didn't go to secondary school. She left and helped to support her sister through university. So they were intelligent people, but not educated. They were very proud of Vaughan, and they were very proud of me too. And at this dinner, I thanked our parents, and I also thanked Vaughan for giving us such a good name-dropping opportunity. You will gather that, if you want to impress somebody, you just claim your relationship to Sir Vaughan Jones. And then, yes. So I've told you about his generosity, how honourable he was, and how responsible he always tried to be. Those, I would say, are the three characteristics of his family personality, of this great man. And lastly, a farewell in Māori, which gives Vaughan our blessing to enter the next world, whatever it may be, and wishes good health to those of us remaining. E Vaughan, tuku tungane kuhu rangi. Haere atu rā, haere atu rā. Te honga mate, te honga mate. Te honga ore, ki te honga ora. Te hei Māori ora. And now we'll complete this with a little song, a Māori song, which, because of my singing incapabilities, Savannah is going to come up and help me sing, and Misty is too. And is there anybody else with a good singing voice? Oh, good, good. So this means love, faith, and peace to us all. You start us. E aroha te whakapono me te rangi Māori e tato tato e te aroha te whakapono me te rangi Māori e tato tato e. Thank you.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you very much. We're coming to the end of this memorial for Vaughan Jones. We'll be finishing with one of Vaughan's favourite hymns, Jerusalem. You're welcome to stay for a refreshment in the foyer to review the photographs or to share stories. I would also encourage everybody to please write a note in the memorial book, which will be available outside, and then later on through the course of the afternoon, including travelling, I think, to the mathematics afternoon as well. So please do take time to write in that, because it will be being sent over to Wendy and the children. These are representative quotes, themes that came up a lot in my research. Of Vaughan, a doctoral student said, "He was confident in his own powers and had a Southern Hemisphere scorn for social hierarchies." A colleague from Vanderbilt described him thus: "He was larger than life in many ways, but at the same time he was very humble." I reckon that whatever your particular relationship with Vaughan looked like, you will recognise those themes. Vaughan was truly authentic, always. The spotlight today has been trained on Vaughan, but it has ranged wide across the great stage of his life. Sir Vaughan Frederick Randall Jones was a brilliant mathematician, an exceptional mind. He was a loving and beloved husband and father, brother, uncle, son. He was a steadfast and enriching friend, an inspirational and supportive colleague. He was a musician, a wind and kite surfer, a latte artist and handy with knots, a blower of smoke rings, a storyteller, a scientist and a creative. Vaughan was a son of New Zealand, and he loved this country, his whenua, his moana, his tangata. New Zealand writer John Mulgan, on meeting his compatriots in North Africa in 1942, wrote this: "Everything that was good from that small, remote country had gone into them. Sunshine and strength, good sense, patience, the versatility of practical men. They had confidence in themselves, knowing themselves as good as the best in the world, and they marched into history." We will miss Vaughan, but the best of him lives on, in his work and in each of us. To my car, please stand. You can shed tears that he is gone, or you can smile because he has lived. You can close your eyes and pray that he will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that he has left. Your heart can be empty because you can't see him, or you can be full of the love that you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember him and only that he is gone, or you can cherish his memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind, be empty and turn your back. Or you can do what he would want. Smile, open your eyes, love, and go on. Haere Marie, go in peace.